Welcome back. And so now we've seen the digestive process and how we break down the foods and how we get them into the body. Now's the time to look and see essentially kind of what we do with some of those nutrients once they've entered into the body itself and how we kind of use them along the way. And so of the food products that we have consumed, we have a few different varieties of kind of general classes of things we can look at. And so we have and what we use them for. And so we have things like carbohydrates, since we have our sugars. Those sugars and complex carbohydrates get broken down into glucose, and we can utilize them for the production of ATP. So we have energy for inside our cells that are there. When we have lipids in the body and we get those fatty acids from them, we can use them to store that away for a later use in terms of energy. We can also use them in the manufacture of new cells in terms of their membranes. And so when we have those phospholipids and for the cell membrane itself, that's where part of those lipids are going to go to. They're integral in the production of certain hormones. And so when we need to use lipids for the production of hormones, we have them coming from the diet as well. Proteins break down into our amino acids, and then we're going to use them for basically protein synthesis within the body itself. And so this is everything from skeletal muscle, smooth muscles within the body, to being proteins that are on the surfaces of cells. And so we have our proteins that are there on the different surfaces, everything from digestive enzymes to get more proteins back into the body, things like that as well. In addition, we saw big proteins back when we talked about the bloodstream and talked about the blood, and we saw hemoglobin, and we had that four uh, protein structure with iron in the center, able to carry all of our oxygen for us to the tissues themselves. When it comes to vitamins, vitamins are a plethora of different kinds of vitamins. Some of them work as a helper of enzymes, and so we have things like coenzymes. Other vitamins are vital towards our ability to see, literally. And so we have vitamins, vitamin A becoming part of our visual pigments that we use for vision itself. Other vitamins like vitamin D allow us to bring into the body things like calcium. So in order for calcium absorption to occur, we need that vitamin D there. Vitamin D is a special vitamin in that it is important for many different functions within the bodies themselves. Everything from blood sugar synthesis to calcium absorption to skin protection to our protection from respiratory types of infections as well. And so we've seen that especially in today's world with the COVID-19 infection. And so more vitamin D that we have, the more protection it seems that we have from respiratory infections as well. From there, we have things like minerals. And so we have trace elements, things that are coming into the body. Some of those end up in things like nerves. We use things like calcium and sodium, chloride ions, all found within the body for the use in different things from nerve conduction to muscle contraction, ATP production. All of that is needed within the body itself. One of our most important nutrients that we have is that of water. But water in itself truly isn't a nutrient per se. It has no true nutritional value, doesn't offer us anything in terms of energy or the ability to turn something on or turn something off. But what it is a solvent. And so this solvent is going to allow us to generate all kinds of chemical reactions within the body itself. And so without water, we would not be able to do the types of reactions that we have within the body, and essentially all physiology in the body would stop. So we've brought those nutrients into the body, and we need to use something with it. So we have our big molecules that we started off with. We have our amino acids from our proteins. We have our lipids. So we have our fatty acids, and then we have our sugars that we've broken down into glucose. As we have those nutrients available, they come into the body, and become part of our nutrients that we have available for use. And primarily we're going to use in the production of ATP, we're going to use those sugars, but we can use amino acids and fatty acids as well. But the majority of which is going to be brought into the process of making ATP for those sugars just from sugars. And within that, we have anaerobic cellular respiration, so we have glycolysis. This gets us ATP, gets us a small amount of ATP. But if we can go through aerobic cellular respiration, we can get a large number of ATP. We've talked about this before in terms of the production of ATP in and of itself. One of the things that happens when we make ATP is we get a whole bunch of byproducts. And one of those byproducts is heat. This heat that's generated from the breaking down of our nutrients, whether it be the sugars, the lipids, or the proteins, is what we're going to use to keep our bodies warm. And so in terms of our heat production, a large percentage of our body's overall heat production is just in the form of metabolism, just in the form of making the ATP to do all the other things that we can do within the body. Whether it's actually moving things, so using that ATP for moving skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle within the body, within that, and so that falls under contraction as well. Within cells, we have the ability to move things around. We need ATP for that. We can move cells themselves, as well as in terms of things like our white blood cells. And then we can move things in and out of cells through either endocytosis and exocytosis, where we're able to use that energy for lots of different processes that we have within the body itself. But we also use those amino acids, lipids, and sugars for the building blocks of the rest of the body. And so anabolism or anabolic types of reactions are all about growth. And so this is where we're building things up. We're doing things like maintenance and repair. We're growing, adding new cells, things like that to the body. Producing substances that we're going to need in order to have things like hormones, have things like glandular secretions, have sweat, etc. All of that needs to be produced as well. And then we're going to store some away. And so we'll have some nutrient reserves there as well, so that later on we can go through a catabolic reaction and break those down. We can break down that stored away glycogen. We can break down the stored away glycerol within the body itself and utilize that for energy at some distant time whenever it is that we need it. So once we have a meal, that meal is then going to contain the components of that meal. And so in this particular meal, we had sugars that were broken down, we had lipids that were broken down, and then we had proteins that were broken down. And all of those go out and end up into the bloodstream. They've been absorbed through the digestive tract, so our small intestines have brought all of those components in, and now they're floating around inside the bloodstream. And so we need to be able to do something with them. If we're actively doing things at that time, then we're going to bring them into those cells. We can power our bodies, in a sense, for up to about 4 hours after a meal. And so after that meal, depending upon the energy content of that meal, obviously if it was a meal of cheeseburgers and extra cheese pizza, things like that, we're going to have a large amount of calories there. It may last us longer than those 4 hours, and we may actually put some of that away for storage later on in things like adipocytes within the body itself there. And so we need to not only have those nutrients there, but we're also going to release insulin out into the bloodstream. And that insulin is going to then, in a sense, kind of dictate the rest of our cells to start to utilize, especially glucose, and bring that into their cells. And so in the liver and in muscle cells, we're going to go through a process called glycogenolysis. And so this is going to be the manufacture of glycogen. So when we have that excess glucose there, if we're not exercising, doing a whole bunch of work, our body doesn't need that energy, we're going to store some of that away. Same thing goes for our amino acids and triglycerides. We're going to put those away in special places for our later use. And so when it comes to lipids, they're going to go into the adipocytes, and we're going to store them away as triglycerides there. Most of our cells can utilize some amino acids, and so we're going to put those away and have them available so that in case we go over that 4 hours, we have the ability to now undergo glycogenolysis, start to break down that food that's there, and start to break down, or not the food, but to start to break down the glycogen that's there, release it as glucose back out into the bloodstream so that our glucose levels stay relatively even. So that we're having a glucose level that went up after our meal, and then it comes back down to kind of our resting state after the meal, and that can continue on for quite some time. If we don't get to that meal right away afterwards, then we may need to utilize more and more of that glycogen breakdown. And if that doesn't cut it in a sense, then we're going to go to the breakdown of lipids. And so lipids that are now stored away inside those adipocytes, we've got our triglycerides there, we've got fatty acids, we've got glycerol, all of that is stored inside there, and we can then liberate that back out into the bloodstream as well. Now our adipocytes start to shrink, they're liberating their energy out into the bloodstream, and we can power ourselves in a sense for some period of time afterwards. All of those nutrients ended up into the bloodstream via veins that are all around the intestines, and so in and around the small intestines and the large intestines, and they eventually end up going into the hepatic portal vein. And so they're all going to collectively kind of converge onto that portal vein. And as they move into the portal vein, then all of our nutrients end up going to the liver. And so the liver is going to get kind of like a first pass at all of the things that we just ingested and absorbed through the digestive tract itself. And as it takes that nutrient load into the liver, it's going to, if it's in need of glycogen stores, it's going to take some of that glucose and store it away as glycogen. If it needs some lipids, and we'll talk about this in the next set, if we need to package up lipids and send them along the way, we can send them along to do what they need to do. Essentially, the liver is there for detoxification. The liver is there for production of things like our cholesterol. It's there for lipid metabolism. It has many, many functions within the body itself, but it's getting all of those nutrients directly from the digestive tract in terms of absorption in through that hepatic portal vein. So the liver is an important aspect when it comes to metabolism itself. And so when we look at the liver, it's going to basically process all of our nutrients that come into the from the digestive tract. And so it's going to take them, and if we're able to use them right away, we're either going to use those nutrients or package them up, store them away, glucose stored away as glycogen, lipids stored away as triglycerides, etc., within the liver itself as well. As that glucose amounts come into the liver, we're going to convert the glucose into glycogen. And so we're going to store it away within the liver itself there so that we have it available for later use. The proteins that we've gotten from our meal at this point aren't necessarily going to be used to generate glucose, but in the future we could. And so we can take proteins, especially if we have them in excess, we can take those proteins and convert them into fats. If we have glucose in excess amounts, we can take them and convert them into fats. And so this can change the nutrients that are there. And so when we have an excess amount of nutrients from a meal, whether it be lipids itself, whether it be proteins or whether it be glucose, they can be converted into fats and be stored away for later use within the body. When we have that storage there, now if we go on a period of time where we haven't eaten for some time and our nutrients in the bloodstream are starting to fall, and so those are going down and down and down, we can then take all of that stored nutrients and bring it back and utilize it in terms of however it needs. And so we can start to go through gluconeogenesis and make some new glucose from it. The liver is also receiving everything in from the digestive tract as well, including things like drugs. And so when we take medications, we have that ability to take those medications and convert them into something that is essentially less harmful. And so drugs, other foreign compounds that may be coming in through the air, through the water, through contact, things like that, have to be detoxified. And so we have to get them into something that is water soluble that the kidneys can then get rid of. And so the liver's job is to do that. Sometimes it takes multiple cycles through the liver in order to do that job. And so sometimes it takes multiple detoxifications in order for that to occur. The liver's, one of its big jobs as well is to produce proteins. These proteins are the proteins that are found in the plasma. We talked about this a little bit back when we talked about the blood. And the plasma proteins are there for transport. They're there for carrying other things. They're there for binding up substances in the blood and allowing us to transport them throughout. Because the liver has the ability to convert substances from a usable substance into something that is stored, those substances tend to be things like glucose into glycogen. We can store fats. Again, back when we talked about blood, we talked about iron and how iron gets stored inside the liver so that when we break down red blood cells, we can convert them back into that. Fatty vitamins, and so fat-soluble vitamins can be stored inside the liver as well. When we get sun exposure, that gives us vitamin D, but the vitamin D that we get from that sun exposure is an inactive form. And so the vitamin D needs to be converted into an active form, and that's part of what the liver does for us as well. Because the liver through the portal vein is receiving content from the digestive tract, there's the potential that foreign things may end up into those vessels. And so we can have things like bacteria enter into the bloodstream, and that's where we have resident macrophages inside the liver. They're ready to destroy any kind of foreign invader that may come in. As well, it has the ability to break down old red blood cells. And so those macrophages there have that ability to start to destroy things that aren't supposed to be in the blood in a sense. And then one of the more important aspects of what the liver does is the production or synthesis of cholesterol and bile salts. And so that cholesterol is going to be synthesized. It's going to go out into the bloodstream. Bile salts are going to end up going to the gallbladder and released into the digestive tract as needed. So that production of cholesterol and bile salts comes from the use of fatty acids that came from the diet. And so our bloodstream is bringing in blood from the digestive tract. We can extract from it fatty acids. Those fatty acids then can be utilized in order to manufacture cholesterol. That cholesterol is then utilized in a couple of different ways. One, it gets sent back into the bloodstream. And so this is one of the ways that people have cholesterol levels elevated, is that their liver cells, and this is a big hepatocyte here, has overproduction of cholesterol. So it's pumping out a large amount of cholesterol. So in a sense, no matter what that person does, they go to the doctor, they get their blood tested, and they draw up a lipid panel, and the doctor says, you've got high cholesterol. So we need you to, we're going to start out, we're going to put you on a low cholesterol diet, low fat diet, and see what happens. So now this person goes on a full-on no cholesterol diet. They're not getting any cholesterol whatsoever in their diet. They go back to the doctors in a couple of months. They retest their cholesterol, and they find that in terms of their cholesterol level, it went down just a little. And it only dropped a small amount. And that's because their liver is overproducing cholesterol. It's manufacturing it at a rate that it doesn't really need. The other place where cholesterol ends up is in those bile salts. And so that's going to end up going into the bile duct, from the bile duct into the gallbladder and stored away when the gallbladder then is called upon to deliver bile salts into the duodenum. They then enter into the duodenum, and we can start with lipid emulsification. We can start to bring lipids into the digestive tract. Some of that cholesterol that's released into the bile itself is actually lost. And this is where things like a increase in fiber in your diet can actually help to bind up some more of that cholesterol as it comes in. And so that allows it to move in there. Other uses of that cholesterol is going to be in the formation of lipids and their production of lipids, our LDLs and our HDLs and VLDLs and so on, all those different kinds of lipids that you've heard about in blood tests. And that's what we're going to look at in our next video.